Can you hear me now? Okay, good. So I'm the EDI co-lead for the NHLI with Beata. So it's my great privilege to welcome Alison Johns here today. She's the CEO of Advanced HE to give the Athena lecture for the Faculty of Medicine. So Alison was appointed CEO of Advanced HE in 2017. So she's had a very interesting career. She's been a civil servant, she's run her own business, and she's worked as a private sector consultant as well. She's also had extensive national and international achievements and impact. So nationally, she's been president of the Association of University Administrators and represents the UK on the Association of Commonwealth Universities Human Resource Management Network. So internationally, she's led reviews of teaching and learning for the Australian government, and this has led to the establishment of the Office for Learning and Teaching to enhance teaching quality across the Australian higher education sector. So before becoming Chief Executive at Advanced HE, she was Head of Policy for Leadership, Government and Management at the HEFCE, where she established both Leadership Foundation and Equality Challenge Unit. So Alison is a long-standing champion of EDI and has had a wealth of experience in the higher education sector. So we're hoping to benefit from some of that wisdom today. So today, Alison's talk is entitled Athena Swan, Changing Policies, Changing Lives, where Alison will reflect on the progress achieved through Athena Swan and where we can improve. So I'm delighted to welcome Alison to give the Athena lecture.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very warm welcome. It's lovely to see you here. And I understand there's more than 100 people or so online as well. So hello to everybody out there in cyberspace. I was a bit worried when the music was playing because I thought I might have to do this in the style of Ella Fitzgerald or something, as I said, but I'm so glad to be able to talk to you rather than sing to you, and you'd be glad if you heard my singing. So what I'd like to do over the next, I think we've got up to about an hour or something, is talk to you about Athena Swan, but most importantly, to talk to you about Imperial and Athena Swan. I'm going to talk to you about some of your successes and achievements. And when I was looking at this, I thought, oh, you probably know all of that, don't you? And then I thought, you probably don't, actually. So I'm going to share some of those. I'm going to look at, well, how do you stack up in the broader scheme of things, both domestically and internationally? And we're going to look to say, we recognise there are some pretty intractable problems or persistent problems now, but is there anywhere that we can learn from outside of Imperial Swan, Imperial in terms of Athena Swan? And I've been asked to finish up with a little bit of my own personal story. So if I remember, I'll tell you about my journey as a woman and how I got to become a chief executive. And so let me just quickly say a few things about Advanced HE. We were actually formed 5 years ago this Friday. It's our birthday. We're a toddler now. And we've got three key things, three strategic objectives. That first one about confidence and trust in higher education is really important because we get a lot of criticism in HE nowadays. And that really embraces all of our work around leadership, governance and management. As you'd expect, we're really seeking to address with you those systemic inequalities for both staff and students. And then we really want to focus on teaching excellence for the benefits of students and society. And I think the thing I'd say about higher education is that we are of and for the Advanced HE, we are of and for the sector. And we really want to partner with you to help you be the best you can be. We've grown somewhat in the last 5 years, and the light blue bits on the map are where we have worked, where we have members, where we've got a Connect platform, a bit like LinkedIn platform, and we've now got 450 members, 150 outside of the UK, and we work with individuals, we work with universities, we work with ministries of higher education to reform the systems, and we work with other sector agencies and bodies. And this is our brand new set of values. I have to share these with you because they're hot off the press, but they really speak to me. And I think when I've talked to universities, it's something that I think we share. Our values we share with you in the sense, and for us, it's about impact, inclusivity and integrity. I'm sure you've got different words. Every university's got different words, but when I've spoken to people, they say, oh yes, those actually chime. And these are our main strands of work. In leadership and management, you may have heard of the Top Management Programme and the Aurora Programme. I know that you use the Aurora Programme. In governments, we've got effectiveness review framework, we can provide benchmarking. Teaching and learning, we've got 170,000 teaching fellows now, and we've got a global recognition programme and scheme, and the global numbers are just growing exponentially. And of course, we've got our charters, whether it's Athena Swan or the Race Equality Charter. And we truly do operate globally, and Athena Swan has become global, as you can see from this map. The purple blocks are where Athena Swan is actually operating or being piloted. And the first country to take up Athena Swan was Australia. But you can see now it's Ireland, Canada, USA, Brazil, India. I never forget having a conversation with India at one stage, and they were saying to me, well, do you think this is a good time to be doing this now? It's kind of like, it's like saying, should we have a baby? Is it a good time to have a baby? It's never a good time, is it? It's kind of, you just got to get on with it. And it was at a time there was quite a lot of very violent things happening to women in India, and I think they got the point in the end. But it's really exciting to see New Zealand, Japan and Cyprus now coming in and conducting their own feasibility studies to take up Athena Swan. But it truly is, as I say, a global community. What I'd like to talk to you about and talk with you about, I hope, is the following. I won't read it out to you. You can see what's on that agenda there. So let's get started. So your journey. So the one thing that I can say about Imperial is that when we looked into it, and by inviting me to talk to you today, I think what's really interesting is that you made us do a really deep dive into one institution, which we haven't done, if at all, for a very long time. And it's been absolutely fascinating. So you've been on this journey for 20 years, and I think it shows. It really does show, because that consistent, sustained approach that you have taken to tackling gender equality is demonstrated not only in the awards that you've got, but the differences and the changes that you have made. And that's why I decided to call this, Changing Policies, Changing Lives, because you've actually done both there and done it very well. So from being a founding member in 2005, you get your first Silver Award in 2006, the first Faculty of Medicine Award 2009. Chemistry gets one of only 2 golds in the country. And now if we look at you and the faculty, if we look at Imperial, 23 out of 24 departments have got an Athena Swan Award. There are 1,000 in the UK, and I can't keep up with what's happening internationally at the moment, I'm afraid. It's an ever-changing feat. Also for you, over 50% across the college here are Silver Awards, and that compares to just under a third nationally. So well done, give yourself a clap. Okay, you're the leaders in this. And I said that really reflects on the impactful work that you have carried out. Here are the figures, here are the numbers. You can see Imperial in the first column and then the other departments. And here we are in the Faculty of Medicine with 7 out of 8 having silver. And this compares to just 2/3 of medical science departments nationally. So again, a huge achievement. I think you really ought to be thinking of going for gold, actually. And the reason I say that is your long history of engagement and impact, plus the very positive feedback on the recent peer review assessment of Imperial positions you in a really good position. And if you are thinking about it, wanting to know what it's like, what does it look like, pick up tips or ideas, here are the gold medical departments who you might like to make contact with and see what they're doing and what did they do to get their gold. But you are in a very good place to do that. So what are your successes? What have you been particularly good at? So we've summarized them into 4 areas here. And I think what these illustrate is how you have taken at some points an institutional wide approach. And you've launched an institutional initiative, and then you've complemented it with local initiatives which are specific, and that creates that kind of critical mass and momentum and that complementarity. So in terms of the open promotion processes, I think what's really interesting there is that how you just open this up, you set out a program, and it's worked really well in some areas. So in some new departments, I think it's immunology, inflammation and metabolism, and then digestion and reproduction, we saw a much greater increase share of women promoted. But in some other areas, women weren't even applying. And if we look at brain sciences, and if we look at, where was it, somewhere else, in terms of professorial rounds, infectious diseases, it's not happening there. So this isn't a league table of shame or anything like this. Is just context is everything. What's going on? We know surgery is a difficult area. We know some areas are difficult. I just think these are interesting points. These are curiosities about, okay, so why is it going so well in one area and not so well in another area? Moving on. If we look at inclusive recruitment, as I said, this institutional approach, which you talk about, open recruitment calls, where you provided detailed guidance on inclusive recruitment, gender neutral language, gender balanced panels, training for panels and chairs, that brought changes at faculty level, and you'd expect that. But you've only got to look at the figures. And I think the interesting thing you did was when you did this campaign, it was back in 2019, I think, where you advertised 20 lecturers, again, it's agnostic of discipline. You got 49% applications from women, 55% of those got shortlisted, and 47% ended up in offers to women. And this is where you go the extra mile. Some people just sit back and think, oh, isn't that great? It's great, isn't it? You pulled out the learning and then you produced a toolkit in 2020. And that's what really is about embedding the learning, embedding the change. This sounds like really simple stuff when you talk about it. It's not simple to do. It's actually quite hard to do, to make it happen in a large and complex organisation. Diversifying committee membership. One thing that you did, which I think was particularly significant, was the relaxation of the necessity to have a professorial title. If we know that getting into the professoriate is a really big barrier and something really difficult for women, we're going to be excluding them again if we say you've got to have a title. So you can't get the title, okay? No, you can't get onto the committee because you haven't got the title. And actually being on a committee, of course, being part of the academic community and having that recognition, having done that is important, but there are other contributions that people can make. And then if we look at the women in academic medicine in particular box, this really comes down to mentoring initiatives, and you've been really impressive in investing in this, evaluating it and continuing that investment, and it has been incredibly important to the women who have benefited from that. So to sum up, it's this combination of an institution-wide open recruitment, local actions. Here's an example: promotion of shared parental leave, designated resting and nursing rooms for parents and pregnant staff. It's the combination of these factors that come together and create that synergy. So, the question, what does the data tell us about progress towards gender equality in medical sciences? And how are you doing by comparison? We're going to look at students and we're going to look at staff. So I think we all know that the majority of medical students going in nowadays tend to be, or are, women, and Imperial's no different there. I think what is interesting though is that if you look at the increased share of undergraduates at Imperial over this period in question here, we're looking at 51 to 55%. But the national figures are 59 to 62%. So you are different there. Postgraduate taught though at Imperial, 68% of undergraduates at Imperial are women, but the national figures are lower than that. So it's interesting, you kind of box and cocks along with different figures in terms of each of the groups. Postgraduate research kind of bobbles along at 60%, and that tends to kind of tie in with the rest of the sector. But it's understanding these figures which will really help us to understand what we might need to be doing in terms of getting women into senior roles. And the real barrier is the pipeline. And I think the interesting question to ask is, how far back in the pipeline do we need to go to get women into the right places, into the right jobs? If we look at clinical academic staff at Imperial, 48% are women. The national trend is, or the national figure is 55%. So my question is, does that suggest some sort of drop off in the pipeline here at Imperial? I don't know. But what you do see here at Imperial is a rapid increase in the share of teaching only contracts. So you've gone from 57% to 67% in the last 5 years of teaching only contracts held by women, whereas nationally it's at 65%. So you're not too far away, but it's grown very, very rapidly. I think the most marked and interesting point, though, is that teaching and research contracts in the UK held by women stand at 40%. At Imperial, you're 30%, and you've only gone up 2% in the last 5 years. So that's quite interesting. It says that's something I'd be curious about. Oh. So if we look at gender gaps in professional representation, despite that gender parity that I was talking to you about, women are vastly underrepresented in the professoriate, and black women fare even worse. I think we all know this. So there has been some progress, but the gap's still there, with only 1/3 of clinical professional roles in the UK being women, and just over 1/4 here at Imperial. So we got quite a lot of data here. You know, you're doing extremely well on so many fronts, and yet there's those little interesting bits. Now, I know when we talk to Beata and we talk to Jonathan, you have your niggles around this. So we're going to look at, well, what are some of the things that we can do? This is just showing the gender pay gap is getting better, but there's work to be done. So what are the common challenges in the UK? We've identified 5 particular common challenges, and I would invite you to just reflect. Do you share those common challenges? I've already talked about the professoriate and senior academic roles. The professoriate fares particularly badly for women. So what can we do about it? Here's 2 examples of how this has been tackled. So Anglia Ruskin completely reviewed their framework for academic career pathways and academic career development. And by doing that, they saw a 10% increase in women professors after introducing this. At RMIT, and it was interesting, I was at the West Midlands Vice Chancellor's dinner on Thursday night last week, and Alex Subix was there, who was Deputy Vice Chancellor at RMIT. Really active in all of this, so he's somebody good to talk to. They over a 4-year period, they reviewed their recruitment practices and completely changed and redesigned the whole life cycle of recruitment. They introduced this achievement relative to opportunity criteria, which was really looking at measuring somebody's capabilities and potential, regardless of career gaps, illness, caring responsibilities. And they checked out a whole range of things in terms of reducing bias, taking some of the typical things we know about. But after that 4-year period, they increased the percentage of women by 60%, right? 60% more female professors as a consequence of that 4-year initiative. So that gives you a sense of timing, but it shows you a sense of what can be achieved. Well, we know about underrepresentation of women as female clinical academics, and it's really a retention issue. It's that crunch point, you know, it's publications, it's drive for service, it's clinical training, it's having a baby. It's never a good time to have a baby, but you've got to have one sometime if you want one. And there's that crunch point, and what can we do about that? Well, here's some examples of what others have done. And you have your own academic women's medical network, and you've got some fantastic research from your medical education unit, which has come up with some really great findings about what needs supporting and at what time. So you're really, you know, on the game there. Some other examples, though, are of targeted interventions. We can see from Oxford, the clinical neuroscience department, they put in place this year-long academic sponsorship program, and really just targeting at women in clinical academic research. So the focus is there. Leeds School of Medicine, a gold Athena Swan holder, supports grant writing and helps female academic returners with their grant writing. And if you want, it includes medicine, but outside of medicine as well, more broadly STEM subjects. The University of Sheffield invested 1.2 million over a period of 3 or 4 years, I think it was, to support predominantly women returners, but actually anybody who was coming back in to try to re-establish a researcher career. And for very small amounts of money, people got grants from this fund. And in the period of 5 years, that 1.2 million investment brought back a return of 610% on that small investment. So these are small things that you can do. And there's an example from Stanford a bit later on. And then, of course, the trouble with clinical academic medicine for women is about the interface with the NHS. And Leeds have been particularly, I think, innovative here because they have got an agreement with the local NHS in terms of terms and conditions, mat pay, mat leave, etc., to facilitate support in this area. And I think when we look at some of those intractable problems, it's going to really be about how can we work outside the barriers and the boundaries, so outside the boundaries of our university to reduce the barriers that people are experiencing. Surgery, you mentioned it, 11%. It's been bobbling along at 11% for a very long time. But what can we do? What can we do? This is where we have to think about the pipeline. And so what we're seeing here, this is again, I think this is an Oxford example. It's the Department of Surgical Sciences at Oxford. So when the medical students are very earlier on in their studies, they really concentrate on encouraging women to go into surgical placements. It's not forcing them, encouraging them to go and then supporting them through those placements. And this is really about your outreach and how far you go back down the pipeline. And when I worked at HEFGE, we sponsored a massive physics project, which actually supported the Royal Society of Physics to go into schools and make physics exciting and sexy and attractive and something that children would want to do. If you look at the numbers of people taking physics nowadays at university, you will see a trajectory going like this. I haven't got the exact figures, but that's the kind of intervention. And sadly, there's no national body now that is prepared to do that kind of investment and to do that long-time strategic thinking. But I know you're all very good at your own outreach work, and it's something to be thinking about. Gender pay gap and bonuses. Those are the figures. What are people doing about this? Well, Jane Dacre's review, made the change from CEAs to clinical impact awards. And once again, Leeds University, the Gold Department, the Gold Award, they're supporting women to negotiate pay through coaching. Now, I'm sure some men out there would say, well, we'd like a bit of that as well, please, thank you very much. But actually, filling in the forms, understanding how it all works, providing support, otherwise it's all a mystery. Nobody quite knows how these things work, unless you're perhaps an assessor or something. Okay, and then finally, culture, the workplace culture. This is now a mandatory part of the revised Athena Swan Award. You have to do a culture survey of some way. It's mandatory. You have to find a way of thinking about your culture and what kind of a culture have we got here. And I think we're all familiar with insecure hierarchical structures, but we were talking about postdocs earlier on, weren't we, Beata? Clinical contracts with long hours, how the culture can prioritise service provision, understandably, over research, and then the BMA report on sexism and harassment in the workplace. The list goes on, but it doesn't mean to say it can't be changed. So these are some of the things which other institutions are tackling and have put into place initiatives. Glasgow has done very well on their workload allocation model. Flexible working, there's an institute, the Eliza and Hall, the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, the Otis Research Institute in Australia. It's got this fantastic team flexible working arrangement. And there's so much more that we can do. I'll talk about an American example of reporting and support systems a little later on. I think I'm going to pause there because I've done enough talking for now. I know we've got some questions which I think relate to Athena Swan in the UK. I'd be happy to take any questions about Athena Swan now, but then I'd like to share a little bit about what we know about what's going on internationally and what lessons we might learn from there. So are there any questions? And if there are any questions coming online, I'm not quite sure how we're capturing those, but I'm sure somebody is. Okay.
Okay, so any questions from the audience? Sarah?
Not so much a question, point for discussion among everybody. In terms of the surgery, I mean, yes, we want to encourage women if there's a barrier there. But I guess the flip side of it is maybe women don't want to be surgeons because I've talked to female surgeons, you know, and if you want to have a family, maybe it's not. I don't know. So I just think we can always aim for that 50% maybe, but maybe there are other reasons underlying the difference.
I think you're absolutely right. And equality shouldn't be about forcing people to do things they don't want to do. Well, comments from colleagues. I mean, what do colleagues think? What's the view about this? Silence. There's a over there.
There's not. And moving to a position where whether you're a man or a woman, the impact of having a family would be balanced. I guess that's what it's about.
Yeah, I think there are, oh gosh, Edwin.
Alison, I went to my Nottingham reunion at the weekend,
Yes.
and their current female intake for their medical students is now at 80%, 80%. What do you think to that? Open question.
Are you asking me or asking the audience?
No, definitely you.
All right, definitely me. Okay, I'm going to tell you, so many years ago, when I had a house that I wasn't living in, I decided to let it to some students because I thought I might want to go back one day. And the lesson I learned from that was never have a house full of all women or a house full of all men. Have a mixture because they looked after it, they got on better. If it was all one sex or all the other, there was always problems, always a nightmare. So I'd say that's edging too much towards one end of the spectrum. And we're not getting the diversity then either. We're not getting the different ways of thinking. We're not learning, you know, so I'd be a bit worried about that, if I'm honest. Diversity comes in many shapes and forms, as we know, whether you're neurodiverse, whether, you know, gender, sexual preference, whatever it is. But all of those perspectives are really, really valuable. So I'd be worried there. But, you know, I was sponsoring women in academic medicine projects when I was at HEFKI 20 years ago. And I sat in a room with this very young surgeon who was trainee surgeon, practically in tears. She said, I just can't keep it. I just can't do it all. It's just too much to do. And I really want to be a surgeon, but I just can't see how I can do it with all these things that are pressing down on me. My very own stepdaughter's, she's just done Part 3 anaesthetics. She's getting married in August. She wants to have children. She's getting home at 10:30 tonight. 10:30 tonight. She's on a long day. And she's doing all her exams. She's trying to work out all of this. She doesn't know where she's going to be. And I just look at her sometimes, you know, she's practically in tears wondering how am I going to fit all this in? She wants to do a PhD. She would like to go into academic work, but she just can't. And she's got a husband who's a squadron leader in the RAF. That doesn't help because they're flying him all over the place. They don't know where they're going to live. This is what I mean about structural barriers. It doesn't have to be like this, but it's not all down to the university, is it? No.
Can I just make one point about gender pay gap? So we have in our professors within the Faculty of Medicine, we have obviously clinical and non-clinical, slightly more non-clinical these days than clinical. So amongst the non-clinical professoriate, there is a gender pay gap, but that's because women get paid more than their male equivalents if we look by year of which they're appointed. But for the clinical, there is a gender pay gap in favour of men. But that's because of ACCA, over which we have almost no control.
Yeah.
So I do hope you get a chance to speak to ACCIA now.
Yeah.
They do look at gender, but need to look even more critically at the pipeline. Why are women under applying to ACCA? And that applies both to academic and to NHS staff across the whole board.
I think that's a really good point. There's always been an air of mystery around these awards, and I think transparency helps, but also I think what I struggle with is I see fantastic work being done in universities, but it needs to happen in the NHS, it needs to happen in the ACI awards, you know, and it's not fully embedded out. So one part of the system changes, but the other doesn't. So, I mean, we do chip away as much as we can do at an advanced HE. Anyway, the awards are going down so much, and they'll be going down so much in future. I'm being facetious. You're making a very important point. But I think it's about transparency. I really do. But yeah, we'll just keep working away at it. Mm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I sat on the competition for the ACCA awards, and the figures were that if women applied, they were slightly more likely to get an award than men, but so few of them applied. So how do you encourage expectations? I mean, I've heard so many times that women are disfavored by the system, which undoubtedly was true in the past. How do you encourage expectations?
If we look to the Leeds example, what they have done is provide, or it's not just Leeds, it's other institutions as well. They provide training. So the AC awards are coming, ACIA awards are coming up, putting in workshops. Okay, what is the award? How does the system work? What do you need to do? What do you need to put in? Because it's good that they get the awards, but you need to get them through the door and applying. But what I see, not on these because I'm not involved in that, but in so many applications, people describe what they've done, but not the impact. Now, I can't imagine, I think talking about impact is in the DNA of people in Imperial. But I think whether it's the HR department or where it sits, it's about providing training and saying this is how the system works. Because that was certainly the biggest barrier for me progressing my career when I was younger. It was all a mystery and it's not for me and gosh, you know, lack of confidence, all that sort of thing. So building confidence.
Just a minute. I think it's time to read out some questions from online. So I'm going to read 3 questions that go together.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on advanced HE moving towards a charter mark that covers all protected EDI characteristics? Would like to hear to know what Athena Swan could look like in 10 years from now. And has or should Athena Swan go beyond gender equality to focus on EDI in STEM more widely? Ethnicity, disability, sexual, gender identity.
Thank you. They do go very well together, actually. And so you've seen how long Athena Swan's been around, nearly 20 years now, and the Race Equality Charter has been around for about 10 years, I suppose. I've picked up a lot of conversations when I was appointed at Advanced HE about Athena Swan, about the Race Equality Charter, and shouldn't we have one? So what we've done is we've started a piece of work. It's going to be a 2-year piece of work. We started it last year to look at the idea of a holistic approach to EDI, maybe a holistic charter. And the work that we've done so far, Newcastle University did a piece of research for us to get us started, is suggesting that people want the option of doing a kind of all-encompassing charter, but they don't want to lose the Race Equality Charter and they don't want to lose Athena Swan. And that all depends on where you are in your journey. Some people feel, well, we've done gender. I'm not sure you ever do any of these characteristics, but you know, we've got to a point that we're kind of relatively, we want to focus on race now, or we want to focus on something else. So as one of our commitments in our strategy, it will be to produce a holistic approach to EDI. And whether that's a charter or what it is, we'll be working with our members to work it out. But in 10 years' time, I think there will still be Athena Swan because we've got countries taking it up around the world now, so they will keep it going. And I think there may well be a race kind of charter as well, but there will certainly be an all-encompassing something, whatever that might be. There was a question over there. Okay. We have the microphone over here. Thank you.
Thank you. What do you mean by equality, and which dimensions are we concerned with? Socio-economic status, ethnicity, gender, locality?
So I'll take the second part first, if I may. So we are bound under the public sector equality duty to be very concerned with the protected characteristics of, sex, age, etc., disability, etc. So those primarily form a core of our work, so that we help ourselves and everybody else remain legal. But we're very conscious of socioeconomic differences, and we are very conscious that there are concerns in the broader community about some aspects that aren't protected by the law, and we are looking to how we can embrace that. In terms of what is equality, and that goes right to the heart of equality, diversity, and inclusion. So, the equal opportunities of, outcomes, being part of something. I think we tend towards inclusivity now, which is, it's all very well being invited to the dance, but it's no good unless somebody asks you to dance. And it is about that real inclusivity and engaging people.
If there are no more questions from the audience, then I have another question. What are women on top doing to acknowledge that whilst practices in academia are not great for women, there are worse for those women of color?
Okay, so first I'd like to acknowledge that women of color, and particularly Black women, fare the worst in terms of, equality, diversity, and inclusion. All the figures and the statistics show that. What are women on top doing about it? Depends who the women are, really. What we do need to see is more Black women, women of colour, getting into these roles. So we need to think about how we can help them do that. Because the old adage, you need to see one to be one, is really, really true. But was it Madeleine Albright said there was a special who didn't help other women to succeed, and I'm really behind that.
So this is interesting. Have you learned from other countries what can be done to change the culture so men feel the same responsibilities and get the same chances to take time off or work part-time?
Well, thank you very much for that, Beata, because it takes me into the next segment where we learn from other countries about what are they doing to really tackle this important agenda. So let's start that. Maybe I could, I tend to bobble about, I'm afraid. I'm going to talk about 4 countries. I'm going to talk about Ireland, I'm going to talk about Australia, Canada, and the US. And these are the Athena Swan Ireland medical departments. So if you've got friends or colleagues here, you might like to pick up the phone and ask them what they're doing and what are their issues and what are they doing to overcome them. It was the Royal College of Surgeons, though, back in 2017 that realised despite 20 years of gender equity, they identified that only 17.5% of clinical profs were women and only 10% in surgery. And they knew they had to do something about it. And what we see from what they chose to do are some trends that you will have seen elsewhere. But I think one of the important trends was how institutions or organisations get sponsorship. And I think it's much easier to do in medicine than it is in some other disciplines. So they came up with the Progress Women in Surgery bursary, a highly prestigious award to encourage women into surgery, sponsored by Johnson & Johnson, and it's become a real thing. And it's about promoting female participation at the fellowship level. They also got money from Accenture and Business in the Arts to do the RSO Women on Walls. I've seen it at the Royal College of Physicians, I've seen it at the surgeons. We've all got, which is a great way of making women very present and acknowledging their achievements. And also in Ireland, though, the government funding is linked to the achievement of Athena Swan, like it was for us and not too long ago. I'd just like to say, going back to Ireland, I went over for International Women's Day a couple of weeks ago. 3 years ago, there wasn't a single female president of an Irish university. There are now 7. And we had a dinner, all the 7 female presidents, well 6 because one of them had only just been appointed, and then a big session the next day with the minister who's really behind all of this. And I do think we need the stakeholders to be together behind this, and we're seeing somewhat of an erosion of that because, the Athena Swan funding link's gone. We haven't got a regulator who's really sponsoring or driving this agenda, which was part of my job with money attached to it when I was at HEFCE. So we're very much on our own, but we are not seeing the Athena Swan interest or applications going down, which some people said would happen because I think it's so embedded. But if we look at Australia, Australia was the first country to pick up Athena Swan. And the reason I'm starting with this is this report came out 2 weeks ago, I think it was. So the Snow Foundation, they have piloted an equality benchmark. And this has come out through the Snow Medical Research Foundation. And they provide quite considerable funding. They identified 32 measures on 3 themes. So one was about women in leadership, senior leadership, recognition of women like honorary docs, and promotion and recruitment of women in science. And 10 of the most prestigious institutions in Australia have signed up to the Snow Foundation benchmark, and including 5 universities, 5 research institutes. And I think you can see what the achievements are at the moment. So senior leadership, kind at the top level of the organisation is not bad, but when you look at the unacceptable at senior leadership level, this is heads of department, this is deans. Sydney did best in the overall benchmarking. Melbourne is now excluded from Snow funding. Hang your head in shame, Duncan, because they failed to confer any honorary docs on women in 2022. They've only conferred 1 honorary doc on a woman since 2019. That's just appalling. I mean, I just wonder what's going on there. And I just think this is the interest that we are seeing in this sort of gender equity. There are numerous charters and awards which are being brought into operation now, and again linked to funding. But tensions are brewing in Australia, and I think it's very interesting that the Medical Journal of Australia put out the question, is there gender equity in Australian medicine? And the answer just came back no. And because that didn't make the word count for the journal, they couldn't publish it, they said. So they waited for a longer response. And you can see why the women are getting quite agitated in Australia in relation to this. And you can see what the demands were. And it goes back to your point made by the gentleman. Transparency is so important to understand how the system works. Because if you don't understand how it works, it can be daunting. If you don't understand how it works, you apply and you fail. That's not very encouraging either, is it? So this is what they've asked for in terms of the kind of things that they need to see changing in the workplace. So women in medicine in Australia. This is the Australian Medical Association. They made the women in this association pushed for a number of changes which have resulted in this commitment. So this is what we see happening through the WMA in Australia now, really pushing hard again for all of these to be in place. And you can tell me about what other association, we've got the BMA, I know, but what other associations are pushing in the same way that we see Australia coming at it from several different angles. And of course, we've got SAGE, which is the Athena Swan equivalent. Down in Australia. And I think there's some interesting points here. The team-based model approach for flexible working and workspaces at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute. I have got all of these slides with all the URLs and all the links and all of the notes on the pages I'm going to give to Beata and Jonathan to take away and look at. But looks a really interesting model. Curtin will not sponsor or commission or procure any provider unless they share their gender equity policies, and they have to make a benchmark, which is what we do actually as well, but it's good to see. And then the last one really, the Telethon Kids is all about really about culture, but paying serious attention to culture. If we go on to America, America's such a big and diverse country. It's really hard to kind of pin things down there, but you can see the picture in America. I think the figures are really poor. And if you look at the women in senior authorship at the bottom of the page or editors in chief, really, minority figures here. And I think when you see the majority of women are at instructor or lecturer level, I kind of feel maybe we're doing a bit better here. And you kind of think, well, what can we learn from America? But these are general figures. Since 2009, women deans increasing by about 1 a year in a country that size. Oh, this is just for reference later on, some figures. And what they say are holding women back, particularly in America, is the implicit gender and maternal bias. So I don't think there are any surprises there. Also, sexual harassment. If you look at the figures there, they're really stark. 30% of women report this compared to 4% of men. And this is really undermining, damages confidence, etc., etc. However, they do have sea change in biomedicine, which is the Athena Swan equivalent in America. And they have made a massive call to action in those 4 areas to really focus attention on. They have a framework, and I think what's interesting, the intersectionality between race and gender is particularly strong. And I think if that's an area of concern for you, there's a lot to learn from what Sea Change is doing there. But it's a very action-oriented, practical approach to tackling this. Now, this is, I think, some examples of some good case study practice about what institutions are doing. And I remember being in a university where we had a nursery, and they got rid of. But here you see nursery at 10% below market rate with backup care for ill or sick children, so you can do clinical practice. This Callisto online reporting system, this increases reportings by staff, reduces the time for staff to report any issues, particularly assault, and it also comes with great student satisfaction as well. So we've got a lot of reporting systems, but that works particularly well. This is Harvard example. It's a bit like the University of Sheffield example, but for an investment of 2.1 million, helping physicians during caregiving periods, sort of £51 million return on investment. So for small amounts of, it's a bit like the Daphne Jackson Trust, it helps people to get back into their research. These kind of things run internally can make a massive impact. And then, again, training and support for women, if we look at Stanford example, they do make a difference, they do make a change. And then we come to Canada. So this is an overall picture of how things are in Canada. Similar picture again. The big issues in Canada about workplace discrimination. So they've got a long way to go. And their Athena Swan, called Dimensions, is very much about incorporating Indigenous people as well. But you can see what people are reporting here in terms of how things, not only what's happening, but how it affects women's careers and why it's holding women back. This is a whole set of information and data from Canada, just showing the picture of what women are experiencing, but it's really about burnout. Burnout is a big issue in Canada. I don't hear burnout here, and I don't know whether, and you can tell me whether burnout's an issue here. But again, you see government action is linking funding to changes, and they're using Athena Swan now to change the research environment and make it more modern, and through adopting the Athena Swan Charter. And at the moment, we've got quite a significant number of institutions working with us to put it into place. So that's the international perspective. I don't know if there are any questions or observations on that.
It was a question from online, actually, and calling back to the earlier discussion around female surgeons in the UK. Is this phenomenon the same internationally? Are some countries doing it better than we are?
I haven't got the figures, but sort of anecdotally, it's a common problem. Anecdotally, it's a common problem. I could definitely get some figures, but it's about the working hours, it's about the culture and the theatre, it's about a range of things, yeah. Okay. I was also told to tell you this story when I spoke to Beata and Jonathan about preparing for this. We were trying to work out what is it that makes an institution a success? What makes you so successful? And when I joined HEFGE, I went on a regional visit with one of my regional colleagues. HEFGE used to have these people looked after a bundle of universities. And I went to UCL, and there was Malcolm Grant sat there, very urbane, suave, very, very excellent leader and the rest of it. And we had this fascinating conversation about UCL. And I said, well, when we came out, I said, well, how would you describe the difference between Imperial then and somewhere like UCL? And my colleague thought for a bit, and he said, well, and he said, it's a bit like this really, Alison. He said, Imperial is like a military machine. He said, it's all spreadsheets, everybody knows what's happening, everything's tracked, you know, and it's just like a well-oiled machine, and it's militaristic in it. I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, well, how would you describe UCL? He said, well, he said, it's like a cage full of monkeys all bouncing around. He said, somehow it seems to work. And I can say that because my husband's a professor at UCL in medicine, and we have a laugh about it, but it does seem to work. And I think that's the thing about culture. It's about, you know, what is your culture and what works for you, but also examining your culture to question the assumptions that we have about how we lead, how we manage, how we do things. And so that's not the personal story. Just very briefly, how did I get to become chief executive? It feels a bit of a mystery to me, because certainly didn't think I'd be chief executive of Advance HE, certainly not in a body which supports higher education, certainly not in a job where I'm advising ministers and vice chancellors about change, etc., because I didn't go to university. Now, I didn't know whether I'd be able to say that in front of you all at Imperial. I went to the top grammar school in Plymouth. When I got there, the learning experience was awful. And now I've studied pedagogy, I understand that it really was awful. You know, it was the classic old fashioned. I was always a very bright, clever child. I always got gold stars, but I went there and it just didn't work. But also I come from a very working class background. You know, my father was a car mechanic who repaired cars every night so that we had a 2-week holiday in a caravan on the coast. I had the most loving, you know, safe and secure environment. But I went to grammar school and my friends' parents were doctors and accountants, and they were having all this extra tuition. And I just thought, what's all this about? And also I had in my English notebook, it's, why do you write sentences like this? And why have you got the tense wrong? I thought, I don't know what you're talking about. And then, of course, I've got this idea I can't write. And I think probably now I'm probably a bit mildly dyslexic or something. But I went through a period in my life really believing I couldn't write. And it was really painful. And then I got lots of jobs. And in the 80s, the sexism was rife. I got called a blonde bimbo, would you believe? Yes, I was. It was really, but you just took it all in your stride. And I knew I wanted to get on. And I did. I worked in the civil service. I worked a bit in the private sector. And then I joined the university sector. And I never forget my first term. I turn up and I join. It's great. In the middle of my first term, I meet all these academics who, on the one hand, are just marvelous and stimulating and they know so much. And then they don't turn up on time. They ask you all these questions, even like, well, why did you even sign the Official Secrets Act as a civil servant? I'm just thinking, I don't know, I just do it, you know. But I learned that the best thing you can do is make friends with them and then they help you do your job. And that was 30 years ago and I haven't looked back. But I worked in the university for a while. I joined the AUA. I built networks. That was really important. I joined the regulator, which gave me a really broad strategic overview of the sector. I turned down I went fast track in the civil service, but thought writing ministers' speeches just bored me to death. And I still couldn't write, remember. I'm really one of those boring people who corrects everybody else's writing nowadays. And my staff really get, you know. But I think what was very interesting for me was I became a chief executive in 2014. And the reason I wasn't one before, because I didn't have the self-belief, the confidence in myself that I could actually do this. And fear of failure was a really big barrier for me. Oh, I should say, of course, I went to university eventually and I got my master's and I wrote a chapter in a book with my professor. And when a professor says that to you, what I realise it means you do all the work, you do all the writing, and they get the #1 author in those days. But it was a very good experience. And so my big regret, and I say to any younger women, early career women, do not put your barriers up yourself. I should have been a chief executive years ago. I love it. It's a job I should have done. I was struggling trying to do all these other jobs. We can be our own worst enemies and we can believe the boxes that we were put in are our boxes. And it's only when you stop believing that that's your box and you climb out of it that I think the world changes. And I know we've got a question from some postdocs about what can they do to help Athena Swan, Imperial get gold So
Gold Award.
get a
So
gold award.
what can postdocs do to help Imperial's Gold Award application?
Yeah. Well, I would say get out of your box. Don't wait for it to happen. Seek mentoring, take opportunities that are being given to you, speak up, try to get on committees, build your networks, be active, believe in yourself. And that's easy to say, 30 years on, you can always believe in yourself when you've been through the mill, but, get friends and supporters, find mentors, find advocates, find sponsors. And if you can't, go to whoever looks after it in Imperial to help you find those advocates and sponsors, because we all need that sometimes. It's that hand which helps you climb out of the box to get to where you want to go. And I can't believe I'm this privileged to be running Advanced HE and pushing things like gender equality, because I was brought up how important all of this was. And thank you for having me today. I'll finish.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share the microphone with Jonathan. Okay.
Alison, thank you so much. Look, it's really brilliant to have you come and show us, I think, from the external eye where we are. One thing that always goes down well at Imperial is being compared to other organizations. That appeals to our competitive instinct, but it's so valuable to see where we stand. And I really enjoyed seeing the examples of what other people do well. Should never be ashamed or embarrassed to take the best ideas from other people and apply them ourselves and try and apply them better. I think that's such an important lesson. We've always tried to do that. So the one department here that is determined to get gold, and the one head of department who wants to get there first, is George Hanna in Department of Surgery and Cancer, who will not rest until that gets gold. And I think it shows a commitment from real practicing surgeons, deep in NHS work as well as academic, that they share your ambition. They see the problem, they're determined to do something about it. And I really wish him very well. I remember the day when Sally Davies, in response to the second round of the BRC competitions, faced with panel after panel of grey-suited white men, said enough. And there was going to be no more BRC money unless Athena Swan silver was achieved by all the departments who were putting in. It was a complete sea change, because what it did really, at least in our experience, was it engaged the whole university in the need to address this because of the financial penalties that could be, and the reputational damage that would be done to organizations who didn't take it seriously. And I thank you for what you've done, and Athena Swan. It's made a difference. And gosh, making a difference in life is what we all aspire to. So I was very pleased you came to join us today, and thank you for your personal reflections at the end. Show, just what a struggle it is. And I just thank you and Athena Swan and now Advanced HE for everything you've done. I think you've made life better in the university sector. Hope all sectors take that message and follow it. Wouldn't that be good? So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.